Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thanks for sharing your day with us. We'll take you live to the White House momentarily for the final on-camera White House briefing of the Obama administration. You see the briefing room right there? Josh Earnest about to give his last performance on behalf of the president. We'll keep an eye on that for you. Also, another busy day at the U.S. Capitol. You see that behind me? Two more of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks. His choices to lead the Education and the Interior Department face this afternoon what promise to be contentious confirmation hearings. The transition of power just 3 days away now. And it is hard, very hard, to overstate how strange and raw the mood is here in the nation's capital. More than 40 House Democrats now say they will not attend Friday's ceremony. And our new CNN poll out today shows deep political trouble for the least popular new president in history. Take a look at this. Just 4 in 10 Americans approve of how the president-elect has handled his transition. And a majority, 53%, say President-elect Trump's statements and actions since Election Day have made them less confident he is up to the job. The president-elect, for the record, says those polls, you guessed it, are rigged. A lot to digest and discuss. With us to share their reporting and their insights, Jonathan Martin of the New York Times, Julie Pace of the Associated Press, CNN's Sarah Murray, and Matt Visor of the Boston Globe. We'll take a deeper dive on our important new polling numbers in just a moment, but let's begin with what I'll call the world turned upside down nature of this Trump transition. Russia today praised the president-elect, and Russia's President Vladimir Putin turned the tables, accusing the Obama White House of trying to undermine the new president. The head of America's premier spy agency, on the other hand, delivered a scathing criticism of Trump, calling the president-elect's recent attacks on the intelligence community repugnant and destructive. Quick context, remember, Trump compared the intelligence community to the Nazis last week after reports, first here on CNN, that he had been briefed on unverified information that Russia might have compromising information about Trump. It was not Trump's first attack on the intelligence agencies, nor was it his last. But the Nazi reference crossed the line with CIA Director John Brennan, who said this to the Wall Street Journal, quote, "Tell the families of those 117 CIA officers who are forever memorialized on our wall of honor that their loved ones who gave their lives were akin to Nazis. Tell the CIA officers who are serving in harm's way right now and their families who are worried about them that they are akin to Nazi Germany." I found that to be, Brennan went on to say, quote, very repugnant. Let's start there with our new president-elect and the fact that John Brennan, he serves in the Obama administration now. He served in the Bush administration before that. He is a public servant. He's also part of the Washington establishment. How much of this is that they are genuinely mad, angry, furious, and worried about the new president? And how much is it that the establishment just can't handle that Donald Trump is going to do things so very differently?
I think it's probably a combination of both. But if you're someone like John Brennan and you have worked in the intelligence community for essentially your entire career, to see someone like Donald Trump come out and really, I think, cross a line with comparing the intelligence agencies to Nazis, I think he just couldn't stand for that anymore. I think he's trying to send a message to Trump that the intelligence community, even when he leaves, is going to continue to find ways to push back at this. Trump, I think, is learning that the intelligence communities have power. They have the ability to get information out. But then there is a piece of this that is just the establishment being uncomfortable with the fact that Trump is willing to say these things.
I think, too, that these are things that these are discussions and animated discussions that took place before, but they were private. I mean, they were in the Oval Office, or they were, phone calls or personal meetings or during the briefings. This is extraordinary in the public nature of this rift that Trump cannot resist punching back at the intelligence community. So you're seeing them kind of come out and like enough is enough for them, and they're going to respond to it.
There are certain norms in American politics and democracy that are just foreign to him, and he doesn't seem to be interested in adapting to them. And I think that's why you've seen his numbers sink since Election Day. You don't call intelligence officers Nazis. You don't go after John Lewis's integrity. You don't spend King Day basically in your own office building and do nothing to honor it except for have some photo op. He doesn't really understand the fact that American politics and democracy is to rest on certain norms and traditions. And folks, he just doesn't honor that because it's not something that he knows. He doesn't get why it's out of bounds. He's just popping off because that's how he's always done it. And by the way, it worked in the campaign. So to him, why stop now?
Right, and that's the point. Is it that he doesn't understand, or is it that he fully understands and doesn't care? That he thinks that's the problem in this town, and I'm going to do things differently.
I don't think he knows who John Lewis is, John.
If you're not nice to me, I'm going to get you. If you don't, kiss the ring, then I will attack you.
I do think it depends on the issue. First of all, when he's attacked, he doesn't care who attacks him, and he is going to hit back. But he is not good at finding a medium of hitting back. You know, we saw Mike Pence out there saying, I'm really disappointed in these comments by John Lewis. He's an icon. We want him on his team. I think he should recalibrate, reevaluate what he said. Trump doesn't know how to do that. He will hit back and call a civil rights icon all talk, no action. He questioned whether John McCain was a war hero during the campaign. He compares intelligence agencies to the Nazis, which, like, the first rule of Washington is don't compare things to Nazis. The second thing is don't compare anything to rape. Those are the two things that will get you in trouble. Never say it, never do it. And some of this stuff he knows and he just doesn't care about. Other things, you know, I agree, he probably doesn't know all that much about John.
And in this bizarre world we live in, remember last week the whole Nazi thing came after Trump was briefed by intelligence agencies, and CNN was first to report it. We did not get into the details about this unverified document suggesting that Russia has some compromising information about Donald Trump. Well, the voice we hadn't heard from on the record, Vladimir Putin. He's the president of Russia. He said this morning the idea that this dossier exists is garbage, and then he went on to accuse the Obama White House of spreading all this talk to undermine the new presidency. And listen to the choice language here from the Russian president.
People who order false information and spread this information against the elected president, who fabricate it and use it in a political fight, they are worse than prostitutes.
Well,
Anybody?
it's ironic because in Russia, they are so used to their intelligence agencies collecting incriminating information about people that they actually have a term for that procedure. You know, the idea that Russia wouldn't even consider collecting anything on a prominent American that comes to their country. Anybody who has traveled to Russia as a U.S. citizen with the president knows that this happens.
It happens to us, and ask
journalists.
any American businessman or prominent American who's traveled to Russia in any years, but including in recent years under the Putin regime. Yeah, good luck with that.
Russia said last week, oh, the Kremlin, they don't collect information on people. They don't collect compromat. There is a reason that there is a word for this in Russian, and it's because they do it. And there is a reason that if you are traveling overseas to Russia and you work in the U.S. government, that they wipe your phone, that they give you a burner phone, that they encourage you not to take your actual computer with you. So the notion that Donald Trump would be so far beyond their purview is laughable.
I like to put things in my suitcase so I can tell when I come back that they've been rearranged. That's one of the ways you look at it. Obviously, Donald Trump has said he wants to get along with Vladimir Putin. And Donald Trump has said, and again, this is part of how Trump views things, that I might lift sanctions on Russia imposed after Russia took property from its neighbor, the Crimea, Ukraine. Donald Trump says, if I can get a good deal on nuclear weapons, maybe I'll lift those sanctions. That's how he views the world. Make a deal. Listen to John McCain saying, no, not with this guy.
I just hope that the president-elect will listen to people like Mattis and Flynn and Kelly and a lot of the good people that I've known for years around him who clearly do not share that view. And my conversations with Mr. Tillerson, he doesn't share that view either. There's no moral equivalent there. Vladimir Putin is the guy that has sent airplanes with precision weapons to strike hospitals in Aleppo, killing thousands of innocent men, women, and children. He's a thug and a butcher.
Thug and a butcher. It's just interesting that we're having this conversation. We're 3 days in advance of an inauguration. Normally, you're upbeat. Washington's getting ready. We're getting ready to celebrate our democracy, no matter who won or lost. I'm talking about the 100-day agenda, and we'll get to some of that. It's an important domestic agenda, but that the world is on edge as well, and that the hawkish Republican establishment like Senator McCain continue. They thought after the election Trump would turn, pivot, say, okay, I get it. But they feel like they still need to remind him Putin's a little different, that this guy is not somebody who you can just say, yeah, we'll be friends now.
And this collision, I think, is coming between McCain and Trump. And there's no real love there, you can tell. And I think for now, Trump is appealing to his party and his base because he, as my colleague Clem Thrush says, is hitting two of his favorite chew toys, the media and Democrats. The second that stops and the conflict moves to Trump and his own party, whether it's with McCain and Graham on Russia, whether it's with more small government conservatives on the healthcare law, that's when this is going to be a much more fascinating dynamic. Because right now, Trump has a sort of measure of goodwill from his own party because the base still likes him and because, again, he's focusing on the media and Democrats mostly. Let's just wait until that changes.
It's interesting, though, to watch the Vice President of the United States is in Ukraine today saying you need to keep the sanctions in place. That is very rare 3 days before the next inauguration that the sitting administration sends its number 2 to the neighborhood, essentially, again, to say, to tell them we're going to try to work this guy to keep the sanctions in place, but B, is a message to Donald Trump. And then the question is, you heard McCain. The Republicans like the national security team. They're going to approve Rex Tillerson. They have some questions about him. General Mattis, they like. The Homeland Security General Kelly, they like. But the guy they have doubts about is General Flynn, who will be the national security advisor. General Flynn's son this morning tweeted this. Michael Flynn Jr. tweeting, General Flynn's proposals to reform intelligence by Terry Mason. He says essentially, read this analysis. That's great. He's helping his father. Well, the guy whose analysis he's saying there is a 9/11 denier, essentially. He wrote The Big Lie, saying that he thinks 9/11 could have been a plot concocted by the United States government. I put this in the With Friends Like These file. I mean, what are they thinking?
And we don't know what Flynn is thinking because he doesn't have to go through a confirmation hearing like Mattis and Tillerson have. They've been able to get out in public, say things that are reassuring to some Republicans. Flynn doesn't have to go through this process. So we take our cues from things he said and written during the campaign, things his son is saying on Twitter, which are anything but reassuring for a lot of supporters
he race baits on Twitter, and he circulates crackpot conspiracy theories. You would think the general would say, son, please?
It's also an open question, I think, among sort of how much Tillerson or or Mattis sort of fight with Trump in the Oval Office or in the Situation Room. I mean, we saw from their confirmation hearings that they are completely opposite from the person that they are serving, and the president. And so, what is that dynamic going to look like, and how much of that was sort of for show to get through the confirmation, and how much of it is going to set itself up?
There's two very
for big
different
battles?
worldviews.
Creative tension, we call it. We lived it in the campaign. It's creative tension. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. We're about 72 hours away from finding out. We're waiting for the last White House briefing. Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, due in that room any minute. We'll take you there live when it happens. Next, Inside the Numbers. Confidence in the president-elect taking a hit during his transition as he prepares to take office as the least popular president in decades.